Welcome back to another Medtech Snapshot, the one question, one answer medical device podcast. Today we're getting into some global operations, global supply chain. With me is Perry Payne. Perry is a executive on the executive side for global operations, and we're going to dive into a couple things having to do with product transfers, as well as just creating product excellence and production excellence within the operations. So stay with us. All right, Perry, so I hope you can walk us through a bit of a challenge that I think I've seen in so many different operations throughout my career that this is just an issue that we all end up dealing with at some point or another. So, how do you instill process excellence in a production environment if the current state, it's just really lacking discipline, consistency, or even a team that's cohesive? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, quite a few actually. I've seen this in like yourself. I've seen this quite a bit in the industry and some of the companies that I've worked with. And in most instances myself, it's seldom been the process. It's been the culture of the people around the process. Invariably, the process is actually quite straightforward. If it doesn't make sense, then through manufacturing changes, manufacturing engineering, you can make changes. But typically, it's the culture that's around it. It encompasses it. If you have poor discipline, you really got to scrutinize how did you get where you are. And the reason I mention that, why do you do that? I mean, you are where you are. There's nothing you can do about it. But sometimes circumstances dictate your behaviors. And so particularly like in a startup environment, or you've done a recent acquisition, or you've inherited something that wasn't, solid, then there are things that you did in order to get to some point of stability, get yourself in the place you are. And now you've got to repair that. That's part of admitting where you are, right? If you don't understand, that's actually worse, right? If it's just drifted and there's just poor discipline. So it helps you center on the things that you need to correct. Because in most instances, people want to do the right thing all the time. If you don't enforce and embrace that culture with people, you never harness that. So it's great to start out by understanding how you got in the position you're in. Okay? It's not making excuses, it's to understand what you need to fix. And that's where you start. And really look, if the processes are corrupt, you've probably found that out much faster than kind of getting here and going, well, we need better discipline. You know the process will work, right? It's just the fact that the discipline that's the shroud around it, that's where you need to put the effort. And that effort comes from cultural improvement. I think, in both regular life and in business, what we've seen is when there's a tragedy, we can regroup on resolving that tragedy very quickly. And whether it's a natural disaster or it's another issue that's caused a problem, if you can get your team to rally around that resolution, they do so with gusto and energy because it's singular in its focus. How do you create that in a manufacturing environment where discipline is the problem? It's actually doing the same thing. It's finding that common ground that makes sense to everybody so that they can be invested in it and give them the authority to make the changes, right, with accountability, but nevertheless give them the authority to make changes so that they own it. So you can drive that cultural change that will then in turn give you the discipline you need to the process. But, there's plenty of lessons for us looking at different things. I remember, Hurricane Katrina and things like this, right? Get food to people. Okay, that's a pretty simple message. That's a pretty simple thing to get water to people. Right? We can align on doing that. We understand why there's a tragedy at the other end. That level of simplicity. Often in the case of transformation for business, when you're seeing issues like discipline causing problems with processes, it's because there's no clarity in respect to that vision. There's overcomplicated priorities, right? Things that aren't clear. So if you have clear objective, what we're trying to achieve here, we can all align to, why should you care? Why should you care that I'm saying this stuff? Right? Have a vested interest. Push that responsibility down. Don't try and enforce it from the top. Have the responsibility in the lower levels, because that's how you drive that transformation, and that will build internal discipline as you go through process steps. And that's when good things happen without you looking. Right? And that's what we're trying to drive towards. So it's all about the culture, not so much the process in my experience. The process is the simple part. The culture is the difficult part.
Yeah, in these situations where, process excellence, right, within a production environment is just lacking, perhaps severely or even just a little, do you find that lack of discipline is because there's too many conflicting priorities going on in the organization, or is it more often maybe it's just a leadership issue?
Can be both, but again, if the leadership are having problems, how confusing are the priorities that they're working to? If your priorities are forever in spiral, right? If you don't have 2 or 3 simple priorities that you're focusing on, And you can, rally people to say, if you're not working on that, you better have a great justification because there are the priorities for us, right? This is what we need to fix. But process excellence, a lot of the times, you have to look at stability as well and maturity. So there's two key things, right? How stable is your process and how much maturity does that process have as well? Because that in turn is impacted by the organization. So if you have a high maturity process, you've been doing it this way for years, but you have low maturity in respect to the workforce, but those things don't combine, right? So you really got to look at that, create your own, based on your own circumstances, maturity index, right? And stability are the two pieces, right? If you're constantly chasing suppliers that these parts don't fit, this is always out of spec, it's causing problems, and that has a knock-on effect to everybody, right? It affects the culture. You never fix this. You haven't fixed this for 5 years. Why should I care? You don't. That kind of syndrome, right? And that's what you want to avoid. So if your process has stability, and then the rest of it is that your maturity of your people for turnover, or temps or whatever, right? Or just there's a lack of aptitude to some respects, that's where you need to put your focus, right? But it's seldom, in my experience, process is easier to fix. When it's stable, so you're stable in both those respects, that's when it's great to go in and do Kaizens and go great, because all change is risk. So if you don't have stability in the first place, you don't know what you're changing. So once you get the degree of stability you're comfortable with, then you can make those great operational improvements through Kaizen events. You can start looking at great efficiency, process mapping, loads of tools that really work well. But those tools don't work well in the environments and stuff.